Okay, so we're doing a sermon series on the one command that as Christians we're called to do. You know, there's not 10, there's not 613, there's not, whatever. There's one command. Jesus was on his way to the cross. He was with his disciples. He knew he didn't have much time left, and he said, "This is the one thing I'm going to tell you need to do." Sometimes it gets confused because earlier on he was being challenged by teachers of the law. And they asked him, Jesus, what's the most important commandment? And he said, love God with all that you are, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that was the sum of the law from Israel, because he's being challenged on the law of the Torah from Israel. But now he's with his disciples and he's in this intimate moment, and he knows that the cross is inevitable. He's surrendered to it. He's going to go to it, and he's going to tell his disciples the one thing that they need to do going forward in life. And he says two words to them: love others. And he puts a qualifier on it: as I have loved you. So we've been looking at what that means and how we live that out in our lives. In the first week, we talked about how when Jesus said, love others, he was giving us a command. And because it's Jesus, because it's God, a command is valid. Like, we should pay attention to it. We should live it out the best we can. But it wasn't just a command. When Jesus speaks, he speaks in things that can have multiple meanings and multiple impacts. And really what he was saying was love others as a command, but he was also giving us the truth of the fact that it was a suggestion as much as a command. And it's a suggestion coming from Jesus because it's like a good friend telling you something good. He said, love others, because he knows, and you've lived long enough, that if you love others, life gets better. It's a good thing. Loving others makes your life happier, makes somebody else happier, makes the community happier. It's all good. So it's not just a command, it's a suggestion, but it goes even further than that, because, we live in a society and a world that tells us our resources are finite. Everything's finite. You only have so much money. You only have so much gas in your car. You only have so much room in your house. You only have so much. You run out of everything. And what Jesus was saying was a command, and it was a suggestion, but it was also a promise. It was Jesus telling his disciples that if you're bold enough to love others, God does not have a finite amount of love to pour out to you. God will pour out love infinitely to you. The more you give, the more you'll get from God to give to more people. And the deeper your relationships will get, the deeper the love in the community will get, everything is better. And the resource is unlimited. So the first week we looked at that, and then the second week we talked about how love was a choice. Like, it's kind of simple, and if you were here, you can go back online and watch it if you want. But the core of it was that you have to choose. You have to make the choice to love. Last week we talked about how if you really want to love somebody, or love the way God is calling us to love, you got to deal with your stuff. We all have stuff. We all have stuff that holds us back from loving. We all have stuff that we need to deal with. Some of this stuff is sin that we've done in our lives by choice or involuntarily, and it messes us up. Other stuff is stuff that happened to us. We've suffered some kind of abuse or trauma, and it's stunted our ability to love the way we're supposed to love. And sometimes you need professional help. Sometimes you need a community. Sometimes there's all kinds of ways that we can heal. But the bottom line is, if you want to love the way God has called you to love, you got to deal with that stuff. You can grow through it. And we talked about the good news, that in dealing with that, you see the power of God manifest. The cross and Easter, the whole Easter message about the resurrection. Well, that's hugely important. But for me, the cross and the tomb are about redemption. You see, God can take something that's dead and bring it to life and make it good. So whatever it is in your life that might be holding you back from loving at the depth that you have the potential to do, that God has called you to, whatever it is, God can take that and change it. And that's the good news. This week I want to talk to you. This was kind of an interesting text to look at for love, but I wanted to bring it to you in a way that maybe you've never heard it preached before. If you've been in church and you've been around, you've probably heard the parable of the sower and the seeds, and how the farmer goes out and he's scattering seed, and some of it falls here, and the birds eat it, and some of it falls here, and it's on rocky soil and doesn't grow, and some of it falls here, and it gets choked out, and then some of it falls on the good soil. And it's a parable. And Jesus is teaching it from a boat, because everybody wants to be around Jesus, or a lot of people want to be around Jesus. There's people that love Jesus and they're hoping for healing, they're hoping for education, they're hoping just to get a glimpse of this superstar. And then there's people who are there to attack him and to challenge him and to question his authority. But like, everybody's there, and he gets to the edge of the shore and he pushes out in the boat, so he has a little boundary. And what I want to share with you this morning about love and the potential that you have for loving others is that sometimes loving others means creating healthy boundaries. Right? Sometimes you need to push away from somebody who's pushing in on you too much. Sometimes you need to realize that there's scavengers around you ready to pick up your good seed. Or that you might be working with some hard soil that's not really going to be beneficial for you to work with. Or maybe you've gotten in the middle of some thorns that have tried to choke you out. Or maybe you've gotten in some really healthy relationships where you've seen love flourish and the relationship flourish, and you've seen that harvest that Jesus talked about. This whole passage is about boundaries from the get-go, from when Jesus starts and pushes off in the boat, to the natural boundaries he talks about that the seeds land on. And then the story goes on, and we find out that he's talking in parables, right? Can you bring up the last verse? Verse 9 says, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. The way Jesus was talking in parables was a boundary. He was saying to his disciples, you'll get this. And the people who were out there to get him, they won't hear it. It's all about boundaries. So here's what I want you to know. Pretty basic, but you might want to write them down. Hopefully you can remember. But you got to keep your number one. Years ago, I heard a pastor, Craig Groeschel, he talked about how he married his number two. And I was like, what are you talking about? Married your number two. And then he went on to explain it, and I loved it so much that I kind of made it part of my life. Our number one is God. God is the primary object of our love. And when we start talking about boundaries in our lives, God is the creator of love. God is the creator of a relationship. God is the creator of you and of me. And God is deserving of our primary love and affection and time and energy. And then I married my number two. my wife. Sometimes they get reversed, though, because often, I give Denise a lot more time and energy and love than I give God. But that's reversed of the way it's intended to be. You might agree with me or totally disagree with me. But if you can keep that in the back of your mind and live it out as a primary boundary, remembering that nobody gets your love and attention more than God, that's the beginning of love, because God is the author and creator of love. He's the source of our love. And if he's number one in your life, then that's a really healthy boundary to keep. That doesn't mean if someone doesn't love God the way that you do, or doesn't believe what you believe, that you can't love them. It might mean that God is calling you to love them more, because as God is your source, the good news of Jesus Christ and redemption and resurrection and forgiveness and grace and love is just flowing through you to somebody who needs it. The second thing that I want you to keep in mind, because it gets really messy, and I don't have enough time to go through it adequately with you this morning, but it involves guilt, it involves shame, it involves a whole slew of emotions. Loving others doesn't require you to be in abusive relationships. Actually, loving others, the healthy boundary of loving others, is when the relationship gets abusive, you step back and create a boundary so that you're not abused anymore. When God calls his disciples to love others, he's not calling us to be abused. In fact, there's a couple of stories there's a couple of times in the scriptures where Jesus sends his disciples out. He sends them out in 2 by 2, which says something in and of itself. There's two. And he sends them into the towns local to where they are. And he tells them to go and share the good news. I don't know if you've heard this story, but they go out and they're to share the good news. And if the town receives the good news, receives their love, receives the good news that Jesus Christ is, the Messiah is here and the kingdom of God is near and coming, if they receive that, then they're to stay and continue to preach and teach. But when they go to a town that doesn't receive them and accept them, Jesus is crystal clear that they're to go to the boundary, the border of the town, take their sandals off, and clap the dust off of their feet as a curse to the city. At no point is Jesus calling us in his command to love others to be abused. And the third point ties into that, and I'll tell you why. In the beginning, God created Adam. He had this really cool job. He was able to, I have a cat. And my cat's name is Snowflake. I don't know, it's my 4-year-old named her Snowflake because she's white. Anyway, we call her Sam. I don't know, whatever. We get to name the cat, but Adam got the job to name the thing cat. And then name the cat, whatever the name is, right? He had the job of naming all of the animals. And God's hanging out, and the animals are coming, and they're coming, and they're coming. And Adam's like, that's a cow, that's an elephant, that's a giraffe, that's this, that's that, right? But in the end, all the animals get their names, and then he gets to double name them too, right? Because they're all buddies, and it's just like there's a few of them. Well, maybe not, but there's probably more than one cat and one giraffe and one elephant, so he's naming them all. Anyway, Long story short, there wasn't anybody who could be Adam's helper, partner, companion. And God recognized that. So God put Adam to sleep and created Eve, and now you have Adam and Eve, and she was a suitable helpmate for Adam. The Bible uses a bunch of different words. It was the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, and they use the word helpmate, they use the word partner, they use different words for how to describe Eve. But the bottom line is Eve was Adam's companion. That they could talk and be together and love one another. And God says, go and multiply. They have kids. And all of those kids, all of a sudden, we're here and there's 7 billion people and billions came before us. Because I believe that God's intent in creation was to create people who could show love and be in relationship. Thus, when God is incarnate on the earth in Jesus Christ, what would the natural command be? Love others, because that's the whole point, right? We're all here so that we can love others, love one another, be in relationship, enjoy life at its fullest. When you can recognize there's a sanctity to life. God granted us life. A life to enjoy and appreciate and love. And sometimes that's hard. But there's a sanctity to it. There's a beauty to it. You can tell when you're in an abusive relationship, if you want to know how to tell, when you see the sanctity of life not being honored. When the person isn't honoring you, when the person isn't honoring God, when the person doesn't care about you, they care more about stuff or power, when life doesn't matter. You see, in the end, Jesus came so that we could have life in abundance and life eternal, because life has a sanctity to it that we all appreciate and that flourishes when love is the primary driver. So what Jesus is doing in this passage is he's setting these boundaries up as he's telling this parable, and he's giving us an example in one way or another that if we are to love others, we need to have healthy boundaries. And sometimes that's hard, and you can get help for that. You can come to me, it's all confidential, and you can get professional help. There are groups where you can go to that people in similar circumstances share stories and talk about their struggles. Because sometimes life is hard, and sometimes discovering how to love others the best you can requires work. But the good news is, just like in this story, when you find love, when you see God working in your life, in directly and in people around you, and when you're able to love, you flourish. You grow.